Zoning and Building Committee meeting to order. Please have the minute taker take notes. Or
Roll.
notes. Who is present? Excuse me.
Alderman Sorrentino,
Been a while.
Here.
Alderman Jacob, Alderman Woods,
Here.
Alderman Sizmarsky, Alderman Roy Wesley, Alderman Eugene Wesley,
Here.
Alderman Catalano,
Here.
Alderman Messina.
Here. I'd like to have approval of the minutes dated December 12th, 2019 for the Planning, Zoning, Building Committee minutes. Next up, report and recommendation. Oh, sorry, okay. Roll call?
No, all of them.
Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
If you don't. Okay, you're confusing. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Report and recommendation, the DuPage County Route 83 study. An update from Tesca and Associates. Looks like Michael Blue.
Thank you all, good to see you again. Saw a number of you at the open house the other night, thank you for coming. And we had been here and talked about this plan previously, it was warmer out when I was here last. We presented the existing conditions information. Where we have been with this study has been that we've completed the existing conditions analysis. That's when we were here. Since we were here with that, we've done a good deal of public engagement. We had a couple of open houses. We had meetings with you and the other 4 corridor communities, and we have built all that into a series of preliminary recommendations, which is what I'd like to share some of the highlights of with you tonight. The full set of preliminary recommendations, all the existing condition stuff, anything that you or anyone would like to know about the plan is available at planroute83.org. It's all on the website, so I'll run through the highlights here tonight and certainly be available to answer any questions, but all that information is available. So the idea was to come up with a set of preliminary recommendations about how to address the corridor. Again, just to remind you, the corridor is 83, a mile either side, running from Devon to St. Charles Road. And this plan is an update of DuPage County's land use plan. So it's DuPage County's plan to address unincorporated areas and their direction to us in undertaking it, working with the CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, is to have a bottom-up approach, is to hear what the communities and the residents think and to have that drive what we do. As we've been through this, we've had this list here of really controlling factors. There are just some things about the corridor that are not going to change and that are important. It is primarily developed. There are no huge chunks of land that are going to be redeveloped. Most of the areas that are unincorporated are small and fragmented, so there's not going to be a significant amount of develop or redevelopment. To the extent there is, frankly though, it's here. Salt Creek stands out as an issue, obviously for the floodplain. The corridor itself, the road itself, is interesting from that whole stretch because it's either kind of a highway intersection or it's just another busy arterial road, so that's always changing. And so those are all among the things that we dealt with in looking to make recommended changes to the land use plan. Again, focusing on unincorporated areas. Some of the most significant ones, again, like I said, are here. This preliminary set of recommendations was presented to the steering committee for the project, which has representatives from each of the communities. And so it was treated in a bunch of sub-areas. One you know well. Obviously, when we started, this was not going on, but the Washington Street project is in the works, is moving forward. So this one is going ahead. The same thing with the western area, with up along Bryn Mawr. Again, this area is moving ahead. And these recommendations came from the comprehensive plan, which we all completed not quite a year ago. And so this information has all found its way into the county plan preliminarily and would be adopted as the county's land use plan. And the idea of this is if somebody comes to the county and says, hey, there's this unincorporated area, what should we do with it? This plan sets that direction. What you've seen here, which is really most common, is that when they're dealing with unincorporated areas, especially if it's residential, especially if there's well and septic involved, these developments that need more services are going to be coming to the communities. And that's exactly what you've seen, and that's what's expected for much of the area. Areas that aren't related to or necessarily in Wooddale. One of the other more significant development areas is on Lake Street, just east, no, other way, just west of 83. There's a gas station there, and there's some wetland there, and that's an area that Addison has been working on hard to turn into a gateway. That's this red area here would be a redevelopment opportunity. For the most part, these other areas are primarily residential, and again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on them. They're not in Wooddale or related to Wooddale. It's available on the website if you'd like to see it. But you'll see a lot of yellow on the map. You see a lot of single-family areas that are ultimately anticipated to stay single-family. Whether or not they annex or not is a whole other issue. I would tell you the annexation issue, as you well know, in Bensonville is just a big, big issue. But for the most part, these areas are expected to stay. This area in Villa Park, this is North Avenue right here, and 83. There's some unincorporated residential areas. The question was, what would that be? Villa Park's plan is really for that to become a mixed use, and that's the way that's gonna go. That's not something we anticipated in the draft, but that's why we do drafts, right? We focused on a couple key sites as examples just of how things would work, and one of the things we emphasized at the open house, and one of the things I want to emphasize here, is that the development that's anticipated here is not about municipalities or the counties taking property or force annexing property. This is really development that's going to happen at the lead of developers and property owners. Again, very much what's been happening here up on Washington and the Bryn Mawr property. This is a bit of a detail on
Can I
the...
stop you one second?
Sure.
Sorry. Could you go back one slide? So you said something that piqued my interest. You said this is going to happen at the lead of developers
And property
and
owners.
property owners, okay. So there's going to be no proactive push by the county to push and drive people for development? Or are you saying they're going to take a reactive approach?
For the most part, yes. The idea of the land use plan is that when somebody comes into the county as either an owner or a potential developer and says, hey, what do you want to see here, right? But whether or not the county is going to go out and say, this site, we want this to happen, that's not been part of discussions we've had or directions we've heard.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No, please, questions are certainly welcome. And this is that Addison piece that we talked about. One of the things that's important in development is that you deal with larger pieces. If you have to deal with small properties, it's just harder to meet all the requirements. So the idea here is that this area of Addison be a single kind of unified development, and you know this well, you've dealt with PUD and that sort of thing. And there's already development interest here too. So in just the year that we've been going through this, there's been activity going on. One of the ideas that came up in the plan was this idea that of missing middle housing. It's an idea of creating increased density in residential areas. There's a lot of talk, a lot of paper. If you read all those planning magazines, there's a lot in there about trying to create additional density and how might that happen with second units above garages and maybe redevelopment turning into townhomes and that sort of thing. Again, there's not a particular spot that we were looking to direct this, but it's something that in unincorporated properties where the lots are larger, this is something to be tossed out there that communities might
Go
want to
back to
look
that real
at.
quick.
Yeah.
Slide before, is it? Oh, sorry, no, after, I apologize. So, I noticed that when I looked at the different slides. I never even got to, as you saw, to the boards. But I looked at this, and there was actually one board, and only one board that pertained to Wooddale and Bensonville, and, which was disappointing to a lot of people, but it was disappointing in the fact that this is really what was being, if we understood it correctly, what was being offered was this idea of middle house using, row homes, townhomes, condos, for that painful corridor, which I say over and over and over, is probably the one I care selfishly about because it impacts my folks. It's Irving Park to Oak Meadows, but what was interesting, it's only east of 83. At least what I read was east of 83, and there was nothing that addresses west of 83, which is in Wooddale, which is the pain. Can you speak to that?
West of 83 in terms of the land use recommendations or
Yeah, so
recommendations
this is,
overall?
so if you look at the corridor of Irving Park to Oak Meadows,
Let me go back.
if I looked at if I read it correctly in the packet, and, what I've seen at Bensonville one, I didn't get to go to the Wood, I was at the Wood Dome, but didn't get to see the boards to confirm this. A couple people brought it up that we selfishly, if we focus on Irving to Oak Meadows, our area, right, of Wooddale, probably, no offense to Eugene, but the key area that's an issue, there seems to be a plan for this middle-use housing, I think is what you called it,
Yeah,
east of 83, but there was nothing west of 83, at least the boards, or like I said, things I saw.
if I'm, did you want to take the question, or?
Go ahead.
No, when you say the middle-use housing, you're not talking about middle-use housing on 83, right? Because getting in and out of those driveways would be
Right.
a disaster, right? You're talking more into the, where you have those residential areas. And those what you're talking about is those basically 35-foot lots like they have in the city where you're right on top of each other. And basically, a lot of the people moved out here because they want a little more land, they want a little more space between. I don't know about, I mean, in some areas, we've got townhomes, and I understand that. But even between buildings, there's plenty of green space and
Yeah.
whatnot, so.
A couple of points to answer those questions. Alderman, start with yours. Reminding folks too, and I did a lot of this at the open house, was that the plan, as the county's land use plan, is focused on the unincorporated areas, right? So there was not land use planning done, there was not development planning done for incorporated properties, or properties that are currently in Wooddale or Bensonville or any of the other towns. So that kind of had us focused on certain areas and certain plots. And that's why you see in these maps, and I apologize, I should have gone through, when we did all these, and these are essentially what the boards were that you didn't get to. When we have these boards here, the properties that are in gray, those are incorporated. So in this slide, for instance, the properties that are in gray are already incorporated into Wooddale.
That's Washington Street you're showing us right there?
What's that? Yes, I'm sorry, this is Washington Street right here.
Okay, got it.
So the properties that we looked at were the unincorporated ones. So the ones that we colored, the ones that we made a projection for land use on, that will be part of the county's update, are the ones that are in color. It's not the intent of the plan for the county to be directing what Bensonville, Wooddale, or any of the other towns do with their incorporated properties.
I guess, it kind of reiterates what a lot of people said, like when you guys had the planning meeting, like a lot of folks came back to me, and you saw how many people were there, said,
Yeah.
this is, no offense, that doesn't impact us, because we have, let's just call it 10 problem homes, 2 are incorporated on that stretch, and those 8 cause all the havoc.
Yeah.
But if I'm hearing correctly, the plan is amazing, does nothing to fix my problem as far as that stretch of owners, and that's why I made sure to speak up to let, the county
Fro-
board members know that people are very upset because this plan is great, but it doesn't do anything to address, and this is not directed towards you, 'cause
I
know
hear
you
ya.
guys are hired as a developer, but as you relay this message back, and I will go back and relay it to the county board members, is we have a very small stretch, and these are great. Some people call it diversion tactics. I didn't, but residents did. And that area still remains, 8 of those, let's just call it 8 homes, remain untouched with no plan. And I think you mentioned earlier, there's no plan to redevelop, buy out, or do any of that. So while this is great, it does nothing for my problem. I'm still gonna be a thorn in their side, because I'm really, what we're asking Alderman Jacob, who couldn't make it tonight myself, is simple enforcement, right? Clean up and enforcement, but I wish in a perfect world there was a plan or a part of that plan that could say, this is earmarked to be bought. The county will buy it, we will redevelop it, or we will knock it down, or we will do something, because that would eliminate probably 90% of the code enforcement issues on that quarter. Sorry.
And I appreciate what you said at the open house too, which was you distinguish between the long-term nature of this stuff and the short-term need of what needs to happen straight away. And I would tell you that just going through this, and we'll get to it towards the end in terms of some ideas along these lines, but this was meant to be, not as a diversion, but as a somewhat different issue, a question of what should long-term future land use be.
Fair enough, yeah.
Right? And so the idea of those 8 or 10, well, the 8 in the county, but right, was not that they could be picked up, and again, let me just kind of, since we're dancing around here. So like some of the properties here in the Addison area, there's single-family homes in here, right? And the idea is that long-term, those would change over, just the way Washington Street did, for instance, right? The area that we're talking about doesn't lend itself to turn into a commercial area or an area of a different land use. The plan doesn't say, pardon me, let the crap stay. It says from a land use standpoint, what it is now is what it ought to be. It ought to be it better, but from a land use standpoint, that's why.
But why
And-
would they have a plan for west of it? So like across from, the unique area that we're talking about, just west of that, though, there is a plan. From what I saw, there was a plan to do something with the housing there, but there was nothing.
It's about where I was when we stopped. So
Okay. Okay.
if there,
Please
if
go
there aren't
ahead.
other questions, I'll keep going, but I've got a few things that start to get to your points.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Where were we? This one is the one I think you were talking about, which is just west of 83 at Deer Path here. So there's a church that's there right now, right? And in terms of looking at properties that are big enough to see redevelopment, you recall I mentioned that when we were talking about the site in Addison, is that small sites are tough. Bigger sites are sites that you can do development with. And so this property is several acres and lends itself to a larger scale development. It's the sort of thing that's worth the time and effort of a developer coming through and working on. And I would tell you too that in terms of this property, the steering committee, the folks from Bensonville said, well, yeah, you know what, that's not a bad idea. We thought it might even be denser than that. But that's kind of the answer to the question of what can you redevelop? You got to have a big enough piece that somebody can pick it up and do enough with it. So that's the difference between Alderman, the property that we were talking about, and this one here on the west side of the road. That's really the difference. A couple other things that we had talked about that the plan makes recommendations about do address the character and the appearance of the corridor itself. And some of them are urban design, kind of gateway, streetscape, landscaping kind of things. For the most part, these were intended to be right along the corridor to talk about doing some native plantings, some things that add some color to the area, for instance, and help absorb some rainwater and that sort of thing. These are not land use oriented. There were also a number of transportation considerations. We're still at the point of getting feedback from IDOT and PACE in regard to these. But in short, I would tell you that the idea here is that there was no huge change that was going to happen to the road itself, right? The road is going to continue to be a heavy carrier of traffic and quite the truck route. And we're really not going to change that. To change those kinds of things, there have to be big changes that are almost as untenable as the situations that people are concerned about. So the transportation side of things is going to see a collection of changes, which again, they're on the full report, and I'm glad to answer questions, but in the interest of time, we'll keep moving on. In terms of implementation, obviously the land use aspect is part of that, but this is where we took the opportunity in working with you and the other communities to try and pick up on some of these ideas of things that worked well. Bensonville in particular said that part of the code enforcement issues that they had been having with the county along Lake Street, that there was some help from the Lake Street version of this that was done a couple of years ago, in that it created some lines of communication, it created some understanding of future and potential development, and it helped them out in dealing with it. It made them more aware when people were coming to the county, right? And so some of these communication things that are in here as recommendations really are, for a land use plan, as good as we can get to kind of address some of these code enforcement issues. And they talk about continuing the lines of communication, the county continuing to be available to you, which by all expression to us, they're certainly open to doing. That this steering committee that got started, that's the county and all the towns, that this continue to meet, that this continue to be one of the venues that's available to each of the counties to address concerns. Not wait until something's a crisis, but to have a venue to address concerns. And there's a few other things here that relate to boundary agreements and such, but again, those are kind of in the details and not to the points that we've been talking about tonight. But what's next? We're going to do this discussion with each of the communities. We've got another open house, if folks didn't get a chance to come to the one the other night. We're going to be, next Wednesday, we're going to be at the Villa Park Public Library doing another open house, listening to folks. And at that point, we're going to be looking to finalize the plan and asking each of the towns to accept it as the land use side of it. So that's the presentation. Certainly glad to answer any other questions. Appreciate very much how involved you all. I know there's an issue here in town, but I do appreciate how much you all have been involved with this process.
Any questions? All right, thank you.
Yeah, I have one. There's some areas that lighting is inadequate, so are they gonna start putting more lighting up on 83? Is that,
We've not heard about that. That gets to be an IDOT issue. It's interesting you bring it up. That's really not one of the things that we've heard in terms of lighting. We can certainly look at making that part of the recommendation if there's specific areas or just generally you think it's an issue.
Alderman Woods?
Yeah, thank you. So from reading this and listening and kind of following along prior years of what's going on, this is kind of a big push by the county, correct me if I'm wrong, to realign themselves with the existing communities in an effort to get rid of those incorporated properties and get them to merge into the city. Not a bad thing, not in a bad way, but in a positive way, where before the county's zoning and the municipality's zoning were in conflict in most cases, and it was too hard to try to put something together, right? That's the underlying driver of this.
Yes, given that it's a land use plan, you're absolutely right. The idea is to identify what ought to be there, true that up with what each of the communities want, and the idea of having those properties be annexed, that's definitely in the county's thinking. And it's something that's a recommendation of the plan, and it's something that as planners we support because it gives better access to services to the residents, right? And it gives better control of issues like code enforcement to the municipalities.
Right. Oh, no, absolutely.
So overall, the notion of annexation is great. And in a lot of these areas, the properties get annexed as one-offs. You know, somebody's well goes bad or somebody's septic field goes bad and they need services, that's when they come in. You know, in Bensonville, there's large areas, larger than the others. Some want in, some don't. That's a whole other issue.
Follow-up?
Yeah. So, given that's the effort, is there any consideration on the county's part, or has there been any talk of being proactive with the municipalities? So, if I go back to the piece or parcel in Bensonville that was a church, that you're saying that might be an option for housing?
Townhomes?
Yeah, townhomes, small lot, zero lot, whatever type of development over there. Is there some willingness to participate in sweetening the deal, maybe? Because sometimes those deals take a while to get going, and working with two entities, it's always hard, and sometimes they might need a little push to make that happen. So has there been any talk about any of that?
The development process, right, of
Yeah.
how implementation might happen. You know, there's so many variables in how that happens, and it's frankly our expectation that most of these properties, if they're gonna develop, they're gonna do it in the municipalities, just because of the need for services. So that the county being aggressive in terms of trying to tee up developers and whatnot was not something that we really approached as part of the plan. We frankly figured that if and when developers got interested in these properties, and maybe some of this highlighted some of that attention to it, that they would come to you in Bensonville and the other communities.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Blue, appreciate it.
Thank you much for your time.
All right, up next, community development vehicle replacement in the amount not to exceed $31,716. Mr. Cage.
that's your motion?
Thank you,
Nope.
Chairman.
It's not my
Just-
motion.
Just very briefly, couple of things. What we're looking for is to replace one vehicle. Actually, we're going to be downsizing. We're looking for more efficiency, so we're actually looking to trade in or sell two of our older vehicles in our fleet. And so what we're looking for is a new vehicle. We're looking for some flexibility. What we typically had in the past is the majority of the same type of vehicles, which were sedans, which are great for office staff, not so great for inspectors. So we're looking for a little bit more flexibility. I think my overall goal is, right now, we have more vehicles than we actually need, so to trim the fleet down. And then the one other thing I would mention is that, and I apologize for this, certainly on my end, the number changed slightly with a couple of the options that Public Works wanted, extra key, CD-ROM for the manual, things like that. I missed that, so the number actually would change. Would actually increase by $516. So the actual total would go up to $32,232. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Alderman Eugene Wesley?
I have a couple questions on this. So, we downsizing the fleet of cars in the building department?
Go
That's
ahead.
what you're saying, right?
Director Cage?
Correct, that is correct.
My question, whose car is this going to? Who's going to take this car?
So the plan for this vehicle, right now, the vehicle that I drive is the Ford Escape, the recently purchased one, which one of the vehicles that will be sold at auction is our old Ford Escape, which has a score of 48%, obviously lower than the 50% that Public Works, rates the cars. So the Ford Escape, which is the building official's vehicle, is going to be auctioned. My vehicle right now, the newer Ford Escape, will go to the building official. The plan is that I would use this vehicle at this time simply because we've transitioned. The CSOs have taken on a lot of new duties with code enforcement. They did help us out previously with the public hearing signs. That's come back to community development, which is fine. And simply put, I can only fit a certain number of public hearing signs in the Ford Escape. That's why we're looking for something bigger. So at this time, the proposal would be that I would drive it because I'm handling the signs at this time.
And I think that's important to note, is occasionally, when he can't fit a sign in that car, he's got to call Public Works. So now we got, or PD, so there's essentially 2 or 3 employees that are taking off a task to transport a sign, or you need to drive back and forth, I would imagine.
Right. And
Go ahead,
just to
Director
follow up briefly on that, I mean, that's an excellent point. CSOs have really helped us out with a number of things, public hearing signs. They've got a full load on in terms of code enforcement. We understand that. We appreciate the help they've given us. I don't necessarily want to have to, Public Works is busy right now with, snow clearing, et cetera. I don't want to bother them, have to borrow a vehicle from them. So the goal is that, we work well with other departments, but we're more efficient when we can do our own work, not take Public Works away from what they do and what they do best, and certainly not take away from what the CSOs do and what they do best.
Follow up, Eugene
Yeah.
Wesley?
So we buy this purchase now. Are we looking the following year to buy another purchase? And the caveat on that, is this the purchase from state purchaser?
Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, this is Suburban Purchasing Cooperative. We've used them before. Obviously, they deal with a number of municipalities. Obviously, they get better pricing. The future plan, and I'm not going to say it's going to be next year. There is a plan to replace the next vehicle, and what I will tell you for sure is, whenever that time is, I'll be back here, and it'll be the same approach, which is 2 vehicles will be auctioned and replaced by 1. Therefore, efficiency, we have some vehicles that, quite frankly, we don't need. I'd rather make it a trimmed, more efficient fleet, vehicles that get driven more often. And I know there's the vehicle maintenance division in Public Works supports that. So the other vehicle that we would change is the Ford Taurus, and that scores 32%. So.
And Director Cage, apologize. Director Cage, you mentioned There's a point. Go ahead. Oh, Catalano.
Okay, so I was going to ask about the hybrid. So is there a big difference? And what's the gas mileage between this and the hybrid? And
Director Cage?
That is an excellent question. So, I know we've had this discussion before. We purchased a hybrid with the Ford Fusion, and the price difference on a Ford Fusion isn't that significant, and I think that hybrid has worked out very well. It's a lot more efficient, get a lot better mileage. The issue seems to be with this one vehicle that the hybrid version is coupled with a different, more upmarket model that, quite frankly, we don't necessarily need all the bells and whistles on it. The difference is the hybrid version is $19,000 more, approximately. So I put it in the memo to include it because I know there's a significant interest in that. Our recommendation is not to go with that because that's a significant cost. But obviously, it's the council's decision. I think just for this one vehicle, they package it with a number of other things that, quite frankly, we don't need.
I remembered my question. The Escape and the eventual Taurus you'll trade in, those were brought into the fleet prior to your arrival, so essentially never was in that program, that preventative program where we score the vehicles, right?
That is correct. Those two vehicles predated me, obviously. The whole SURF plan that I know Alderman Wesley mentioned and the chairman mentioned, that's to kind of form a plan through the capital improvement program to update vehicles on a regular basis. Quite frankly, if we don't, I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of the other departments, but I think Public Works has a similar approach to community development. If we don't need a vehicle, we don't ask for one. But I think what I do like about this opportunity is, unfortunately, it doesn't come with a hybrid version, because if that was a closer cost, that's something I would be looking at. But I think efficiency is key. If we have two extra vehicles that are scoring clearly below the 50% threshold, they need to be rotated out. We get a newer vehicle, we get more efficiency, we don't have as many repairs. So those are the things we're looking at. And whenever I come back to look for, within the SURF program, to look at a future vehicle, again, we will do the more efficient approach. And I'm hoping at that time, whenever that is, next year, the year after, there's a good hybrid option, because I know that's an interest of the city council. But I think trading in the two essentially for one makes us more efficient, saves money.
Great. Alderman Eugene Wesley?
I know at one time we talked about, maybe I believe you in
Still got something.
this conversation, that we were looking possibly putting an electric car somewhere in our fleet. Remember we talked about putting a charging station by the PD there? So what, I mean, and I understand.
Director Cage?
We talked about that several times.
Yes, we did. Actually, we looked into that in depth when we went ahead with the purchase for the hybrid. The decision at the time was not to go with an electric vehicle because it added some extra costs. Obviously, as time goes on, the hybrid technology gets better, much better.
Yeah.
The electric vehicles get much better. Do they cost more? Yes. Do we have an additional cost in terms of a charging station? Yes. But I think you're exactly right. As time goes on, the ranges of those vehicles get higher. Really, what we would be looking at is a vehicle that would suit our needs, that we could match up with either a hybrid vehicle or an electric vehicle. So,
And I think that technology is evolving. I mean, we just bought a hybrid and went from a 3-year warranty on the battery to a 7-year in just 1 year. So I can't even imagine where we'll be in 2 years when you come back, or a year from now.
exactly. When we looked at the electric vehicle, because we were looking at a sedan, a Ford Fusion at the time, the range was 30 to 35 miles. Well, now the ranges are eclipsed by that, and that's, I believe that was a year and a half, 2 years ago. So we're getting to the point where I think if we're looking at a sedan or we're looking at an electric vehicle, absolutely. For this type of vehicle at this time, I don't think it's the best option in terms of the hybrid, just because of the cost. They don't do an electric version of this vehicle. But certainly, I take your comments to heart. We will look at that with the next vehicle and come back and bring you some good options.
Great. Any other questions? Alderman Woods?
Yeah, is this a four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive vehicle?
Yes, that is correct.
And
Go ahead.
second, if I will, what's the warranty on the vehicle?
Excellent question. So the,
I saw it.
yeah, the warranty from SPC, Suburban Purchasing Cooperative, is 3-year, 36,000-mile limited bumper to bumper, and then 5-year, 60,000 for the powertrain.
So in,
Sure, go ahead.
so in looking at the menu of options here, they have a 6-year, 100,000 premium care warranty. We looked at that. Is there any value in spending $2,000 to get the 6 years, 100,000
Director
premium?
Cage?
I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know what it covers. I'm just saying, is that something that we would want to look at?
Director Cage.
Excellent question. I tend to defer, the options to Public Works, the street division. They know a lot more about vehicles than I will ever know. It's a good question. They didn't check the box. Obviously, they went through it. They purchase a lot more vehicles than I do. Generally speaking, in the SURF program, community development vehicles we have a replacement period of 8 years. What we're seeing right now from the first vehicles that we bought a few years ago, that we'll get through the 8 years quite comfortably. We don't put a huge amount of miles on these vehicles. So I'm trusting Public Works. I'm trusting my gut feeling, which is I don't think at this moment in time that's a good option. But that's just more based on what Public Works recommends, their street division, and then the vehicle division, and then my kind of thought on how much we use the vehicles. So I think it's an excellent point. I think that's something that I will probably want to talk to Public Works and the vehicle division about.
Okay.
Any
On
follow-up?
the same, yeah, on the same line. So we're getting the 3-year,
36.
3-year, 36 factory warranty.
okay. All right, that's good. Thank you.
And that warranty will not cover, just haven't seen those, they won't cover the preventative stuff like the tires, the brakes, and all that good stuff anyhow, so
Right.
kind of irrelevant. Okay, great. Is there a motion? Anybody?
I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of the vehicle.
The amount of
32,232.
Yeah, 32,000.
$232?
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Items to be considered at, thank you, Director Cage. Items to be considered at future meetings. Banners on February 13th. SBT Bank redevelopment, March 2020. Engineering standards, March 2020. Airbnb regulations, spring 2020. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion, or rather, meeting adjourned. Oh, thought we had that, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Okay, before I start Public Works Committee, I have an announcement in reference to the Holiday Lights Recyclable Program. Due to the overwhelming participation, we're going to extend it for one more week. The residents dropped off 350 pounds worth of holiday lights. The drop-off is still going to be at City Hall at the Rotunda. And on the behalf of the committee of the Wooddale for the Green tomorrow, thank you for recycling, and let's keep it green. Thank you. And so, Public Works. Minute taker, please take note. The same council members are present. And I need a motion for the approval of the minutes of December 12, 2019, Public Works Committee meeting. Any corrections?
Second.
Any corrections? No corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And next is a report and recommendation for fiscal year end in 2021 through 2022 Capital Roads Program. in the amount not to exceed $120,970. That is my motion. And
Second.
Director Lane, you want to touch on that briefly? Go ahead.
Absolutely, thank you, Chairman. You have a question if you want to address that first.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Regarding George Street from Mill to Prospect, we only own half of that road and the other half is Itasca. My understanding is we've already reached out to Itasca and we're in the process of IG.
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, correct. I've reached out to the Director of Public Works for Itasca. We're going to do a joint resolution or an intergovernmental agreement to split the cost of resurfacing that street.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And I know this phase of the project won't be done till not this summer, but the following summer, but because Baxter's gonna probably increase that price just a little bit. We have, in fiscal year '22, we've got Oak, Montrose to Windsor, Walnut is only Sunnyside to Windsor, and then Sunnysides will be done from Wooddale to Oak. So in that whole section right there on Sunnyside, basically, or on Walnut, I should say, south of Sunnyside is not included. And I know we've discussed this, and this was more of a reconstruction, and I know you gave me the price at the time. But if we're gonna be in that area so you're gonna do 2 full blocks from Montrose to Windsor, honestly, 25%, so 4 pieces, one piece will not be done. It's kind of ridiculous.
Go ahead.
I know, that's why I like to get rid of that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and I have a brief presentation, gives a general overview of which streets will be done, and you'll see that given, depending on what happens with the outcome of Central Avenue, whether we receive STP funding for it or not, and whether we decide to include that in our program, there may be some additional funds there where we can include some other streets in that fiscal year.
Besides, I understand, but besides Walnut, right? So I'm suggesting that we add that quarter piece in.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, and as you said, that's the out year of this agreement. It would be fiscal year 2022. So what I would suggest is that we make a recommendation to award an agreement tonight, and then we handle that down the road if we want to amend this contract.
I'd like to know what Baxter's gonna charge us for that extra little piece. I don't wanna, we award them for the entire project's 120, and then all of a sudden, this one small section's 50,000. I don't think they would do that, but I always like to see it in writing personally.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Director, with your presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. So it is everybody's favorite time of year where we begin preparations for our capital road program. Tonight we are focusing specifically on the design and construction oversight services. For starters, a brief overview of which streets will be done in each fiscal year. We're awarding this on a 2-year basis as we've done in the past. I apologize if this map is a little difficult to see. I have the streets broken out there in the table on the right. So this is fiscal year 2021. You'll see that the approximate costs here reflect not only the design and construction oversight services, but the construction costs as well. So you'll see that we are within the budgeted CIP amount for that fiscal year. Fiscal year 2022 has a number of options revolving around what happens with Central Avenue. Central Avenue is a FAU route. It is eligible for federal funding through the Surface Transportation Program administered by DMMC. So the first option is that Central is awarded STP funding, and we include it in the program, and we exclude a certain portion of Edgewood over here and Balm Court. And you'll see the total price there is within our CIP budget. Option 2 is that we do not receive federal funding and we exclude Central Avenue from our program, and we include those sections of Edgewood and Balm Court, and that again is within our budget. Option 3, the most likely option if we do receive STP funding, is that we do Central and this section here, and it is again within the constraints of our CIP budget. So as I said, we were awarding this on a 2-year basis.
for design and construction engineering services. We received seven proposals in all. Our budget for construction, engineering, and design services was $108,000 for fiscal year '21 and $143,168 for fiscal year '22. You see most of these, the majority of these are within that range. Robinson Engineering did not submit an alternate pricing for the addendum which was requested, so they are being considered non-responsive, which makes Baxter and Woodman the lowest responsive bidder. The RFP steering committee met and unanimously recommended Baxter and Woodman receive the agreement. They have a familiarity with our street condition as they have prepared our street sufficiency study. They've performed a number of jobs throughout town to satisfactory performance. They also have a high familiarity with the STP funding process. So it is our recommendation that we approve an agreement with Baxter and Woodman for professional services for fiscal year '21 to '22 capital roads program in the amount not to exceed $120,970.
Okay, any questions? Mr. Wesley?
So, what I just heard is that we are going, go back to your slide there, if you don't mind. So, the green one, if we get the funding, you're going to eliminate street project on Edgewood, right?
That was one of the options if we wanted to stay within our original budgeted amount. But we actually increased that budget this year in the capital roads program. So it is likely that if we do receive federal funding for Central Avenue, we would still include that portion of Edgewood. So Edgewood would essentially be completed from Foster all the way to South Thorndale, and we would also include that small section of Balm Court.
So regardless, Edgewood's going to be done, regardless, whatever.
Correct, yes.
So because I'm just saying, we did street study, if that street's bad shape, we aren't going to play games with it. We're going to follow the street study, and we're going to follow the street study.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we increased the amount from past years, so we can include that section as well.
Mayor?
Yeah, just so we understand, the central is FAU route, so if we don't get the money for this time, we might get it on the next time because they've changed some of the scoring systems to try and get STP funds, so some smaller communities who don't have projects that score higher get a chance. So central will still get done, but unfortunately, so if we do it ourselves and pass on trying to get the money, then, well, we're out. But I do have a question on you brought up the total of how much was budgeted. Can we go back to that? You're saying, oh, that's design and construction supervision, right?
Correct.
So the 2 years together, we budgeted $251,000. Correct? So, and we're coming out with 120, well, depending what extra backs are. And again, we need a motion to allow that, to add that other street, otherwise it's not added.
Go ahead, Alderman Messina.
Could you go to the next slide? Maybe not that one. The one that had all the streets. There you go. Yep. Can you explain why we would do Walnut, but we would only go from Sunnyside to Windsor versus Montrose to Windsor?
That's what I said.
Okay. No, different street though.
Go ahead.
Is it the same street? Are you saying Walnut? I'm sorry. Okay, I thought you were saying.
That's the one
your
I
first
was talking
yeah, the
about
first time.
adding on.
Okay, I'm sorry. That was the first one you asked. I'm sorry.
And the reason was.
Right, we know. They're right there. I just didn't
Well, no,
understand. I
but
mean,
the reason was that one was a reconstruction versus a grind and resurface. It's a little more work involved from that's what I was told during the meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Lane.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Given that it is probably a total reconstruction, it does have a higher cost associated with it. Given the high likelihood that we don't receive STP funding for Central Avenue, we'll have anywhere from $250,000 to $290,000 left within our capital budget that we could add some of those streets in there.
makes sense.
Alderman Wesley?
So, I'm gonna go back to the street study. So, adding it on, where did that street study come in for that to be added on if we have to? What's the
Then-
points on it?
The number, I think it was
Go ahead.
It's rated as a 3, which is recommended for reconstruction.
Okay, we got streets out there that's rated number 1 that was cut short too, and we didn't finish that, so.
Go ahead.
I think it behooves us to try to group streets by area to limit mobilization costs, which is one of the things we take into consideration. Also, other projects that are throughout town, you'll notice in fiscal year '21, we kind of avoided Ward 2 and 3, given that they have the stormwater project over there. We don't want to inundate any one area with construction in any given year.
Okay, and my question is, there is a street on Ward 3 that's rated 1, but I don't think we're going to do the stormwater project in the near future. It's going to take a few years. So do we have kind of a patching program that we can handle some of that? I'm talking about Arlene Drive.
We do have a yearly patching program that we budget for separately outside of the capital program.
Okay. Any more questions?
Is there a motion on the floor?
No, not yet.
So,
There was a motion for the 120, 970.
so we're going to make a motion to up that?
No, you don't have that number yet.
Okay. So I'll make a motion for the Capital Road Program in the amount not to exceed $120,970. That is my motion.
We already did that.
Yeah, we
Right.
have that. We
You
have
made
that-
a motion, I
that
seconded
motion.
it.
That's done.
Okay.
So we have to,
So what are we amending then, if we're waiting for the price? Go ahead.
I would recommend we wait to amend this agreement. We
right.
recommend to award the agreement tonight, and we wait till amend it until we know what that price is and what streets we want to include for certain or not.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
so will we have that price next week?
I would actually recommend, given that this is fiscal year 2022, we might want to wait and see. The call for projects for STP funding closes in March this year, so we'll know whether we get programmed for that funding or not. So at that point, we would likely decide if we don't get that funding, if we want to include other streets or not. And then we can get a more adequate pricing for that information.
Okay.
That sounds like
So we have a roll call, please?
Alderman Sorrentino?
Yes.
Alderman Woods?
Yes.
Alderman Eugene Wesley?
Yes.
Alderman Catalano?
Yes.
Alderman Messina?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next is items to consider at future meetings. Elizabeth Drive Bridge Design, coming up in February or March 2020. Any other items to consider? If not, I'll make a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Good job, Director.